if you're advising Lee Kuan Yew in the 60s with the advice you would likely give to a developing country now, would Singapore have been even more successful than it ended up? Would it have been less successful?
With Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, I mean, it's the wrong way around. I mean, I learned so much from him. So the fascinating thing about Lee Kuan Yew is he took three decisions, really three important decisions right at the beginning for Singapore. Each one of them now seems obvious. Each one at the time was deeply contested. Number one, he said, everyone's going to speak English in Singapore. Now, there were lots of people who said to him at the time, no, we've been thrown out of Malaysia effectively. We're now a fledgling country, a city-state country. We need to have our own local language. We need to be true to our roots and everything. He said, no, English is the language of the world and we're all going to speak English. Today, that's what happens in Singapore. Secondly, he said, we're going to get the best intellectual capital and management capital from wherever it exists in the world, and we're going to bring it to Singapore. And again, people said, no, we should stand on our own 2 feet. Why? And you're also bringing in the British, who we've got all these disputes with. And he said, no, I'm going to bring in the best from wherever they are, and they're going to come to Singapore. Today, Singapore exports intellectual capital, right? And the third thing he did was he said there's going to be no corruption. And one of the ways we're going to do that is we're going to make sure our political leaders are well paid, which the Singapore leaders are the best paid in the world by a factor of about 10 for the next person. And there's going to be zero tolerance of corruption, zero tolerance of corruption. And those are the three decisions that were instrumental in building Singapore today.
You could go to the UK right now or the US, and fundamentally, if you had to narrow down the list of the three key priorities, and what would somebody who is empowered to do so, what could they do to fix that? Do Western leaders, if Starmer is elected in the UK or whoever becomes president in the US, would they have the power to enact what the equivalent would be for their societies right now? Or is it just sort of like you have all this inertia, you can't start fresh like Singapore could start in the 60s?
No, you definitely can. I mean, the American system's different because it's a federal system, right. and there's probably in many ways it's a good thing that there are limits to what the federal government can do in the US. But if you take the UK or most governments where there's a lot of power at the center, I mean, what we've just been talking about, which is the technology revolution, how do you use it to transform healthcare, education, the way government functions? How do you help educate the private sector as to how they can embrace AI in order to improve productivity? I mean, this is a huge agenda for a government and a really exciting one. I mean, I keep saying to people that were in politics today, because sometimes they get a bit, people get a bit depressed about being in politics because you get all this criticism. People certainly in the West feel society's not changing fast enough and well enough. And I say, no, it's a really exciting time to be in politics because you've got this massive revolution that you've got to come to terms with.